This episode was brought to you by Resilient Nutrition. Pals, greetings and welcome once again to another episode of Everything Endurance. It is, as always, a pleasure to have you with us. It's, it's the morning of Friday the 16th of July as I record this introduction. Those eagle-eared among you who already subscribed to this and get it as soon as they come out, if you're listening to this on the weekend when it's released, you've got some dot watching to do. This is a bit of a summer spine themed episode in that we're recording with somebody else who did tremendously well on this year's Summer Spine. But there are more links. There are more links to that heralded race. We've got spine repeat offender Gwyn Stokes currently out having a go at the Pennine Way FKT. So he set off from Kirkyetum this morning with Edale in his sights. I'll be watching his tracker over the next day or two. That would be taking a record from John Kelly. John Kelly, who is now out on the Wainwrights, going for a full Wainwright round. So he's got a good sort of 5 to 6 days of hard work ahead of him. Looking like I don't want to say that it's looking like he might get some good weather this time. He seems to be a magnet for the bad stuff. I'm literally touching wood as I say this. Hopefully I don't jinx him. I hope he has a great time out there, but that would be tremendously exciting. Also, on the theme of the Summer Spine, I checked in this morning and it would appear there are still places available for the summer races next summer. So, June 2022, drop what you're doing and head over and apply now, because they're well over half of the space is gone now. There's the Spine Sprint there in summer for those looking for something that's a little bit of a taster of the spine experience. Not that it's an easy race. You're still looking at 46 miles without checkpoints. You are still very much in that self-sufficient, nabbing for yourself, 46 miles with nothing but you and your wits to get through it. But yeah, there's the sprint edition now if people want to get involved in that. And then there's the old favourites, the Summer Spine Challenger at 108 miles and the big one, the bad one, 268 miles for that full Summer Spine experience. Head over to thespinerace.com and have a look now. There are still places available. I've said spine at least 8 times in this episode already, and we are but minutes in. You're going to hear it a few more times because that's what's going to happen with the person I'm talking to today. Today I'm going to be talking to just one of the loveliest people in ultra running, and ultra running is a scene that it just seems to be absolutely full of lovely people. We're going to be talking to a runner who had already previously won the Winter Spine, had previously held the course record on the Winter Spine, and is now the proud holder of the course record for the Summer Spine as well, and has a win on the summer event under his belt too, as of a few weeks ago when we did the Summer Spine race in June. I am obvious. I mean, there's much more to this guy's CV. If you haven't heard of him already, we're talking multiple world records. He's runs 24-hour plus events at international level. He'll be off to the UTMB later this summer, as long as all that goes ahead as well. He is a fantastic ultra runner and adventure racer, and we're going to hear more today, a former mountaineer too. So without further ado, without listening to any more of me waffling, we are going to go into the interview. I'm going to warn you now, the sound isn't fantastic all the way through. We changed mics, we changed headphones, we stopped and started the call, we reset our routers, we did everything we could. We don't know where the odd wavering sound in his voice was coming from, but you can still hear what he's saying all the way through. Just letting you know now. We are today, of course, going to be talking to the delightful Eoin Keith. Eoin, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. We're what, 2-3 weeks on from the Summer Spine now?
Something like that. Time just sort of melts that it's that kind of time frame.
Yeah, sadly the time has gone very fast since the race. I was enjoying being out there so much after a year cooped up.
Likewise. Yeah, it was great.
Although obviously I got to travel around the course in a vehicle rather than riding on foot, but I'm sure we both had a good time in our own ways. Are you feeling recovered?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty recovered now. Yeah, back to running, training as normal. Not quite as fast, but getting there.
Congratulations again on a fantastic performance. It was. I mean, I love watching the spine race. I'd be at home watching the dots if I wasn't, working behind the scenes anyway. But it was fantastic to see you come through and win the summer race as well. So,
I have to say it's one of my great race experiences as well. And winning was an obvious target, but to win in the style and such an enjoyable race was fantastic. Really exceeded expectations. It was marvelous from my point.
We've got ahead of ourselves slightly. Obviously, I want to talk about the summer spine a bit, but I have to say, you really did look like you were enjoying yourself. Nobody gets through a winter spine without, looking like hell some of the time. And I say that with all respect intended, Ian, but you looked like you were enjoying yourself on this race. You really did.
Yeah, and I pretty much was for, I would say, 95% of the time. Even the lowest of the low points is probably coming into the third aid station, because that was the most sleep deprived I was. But even that was very moderate in comparison to any experience I would have had in the winter spine in comparison. And you're absolutely correct about the winter spine. It's the drama version, that's for sure, because that's arduous. Whereas I went into the summer spine with the attitude that I'm going to enjoy this. This is going to be a nice contrast from the winter, and everything is set up to be as enjoyable as it could possibly be. So let's try and do this and actually have some fun on this one. Type 1 fun as opposed to type 2.
Yeah, well, it looked like mission accomplished on that front. Absolutely. But as I said, that's getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I'd like to go back a little further because, it might seem a lot of the time like I don't do any research for these podcasts, but I did actually go back and have a listen to the one we did last year. Also, one thing from that podcast that we did earlier in 2020 is you can tell it was recorded before everything went pandemic crazy, because we're so chipper. There's not a care in the world.
Yeah.
Talking about what we're going to be up to in the next week or two and stuff.
Oh yeah, the fantasies. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a more innocent time there, 3 weeks before all hell broke loose. But
absolutely.
We didn't get a lot of time during that episode to sort of talk about you much as a runner prior to your contact with the spine. And, it's easy for me to talk about you and the spine race pretty much entirely because that's where I know you from. But I'd like to go back a little further if you don't mind.
No problem.
Were you at all a sporting person in your youth? Because there seems to be a split when I talk to ultra runners of people who sort of haphazardly came at it in their 30s out of nowhere, and other people who were just born and bred for sport. So where did you come from?
I'd be in the former, most definitely. I was a nerdy kid, an absolute nerdy kid. Right from age 4 or 5, I was into science and technology and things like that, watching Tomorrow's World and things like that. Was pretty decent at school and actually liked a lot of the subjects. Was absolutely terrible at sports. I'm a really bad sprinter, so a good day at school sports for me was second last. That would be a great result, because normally I was last in every running race I ever did at school. And of course, all the ball sports. And in Ireland, we have more than just soccer or football. We have 3 football codes: rugby, soccer, and Gaelic football. And in the town I grew up, hurling, which is like a very high-speed, vicious version of hockey, for want of a description, was the more prominent sport. So, and I was equally rubbish at all of them. So, this didn't make for much of a sporting background. In school, they would generally split the PE class into the serious people and the idiots, and I was in the idiots with the PE split every time, except the one sport I picked up in my teenage years was pitch and putt, which, of all things, mini golf. So I became quite good at that. And that certainly brought out my competitiveness. And I really enjoyed the man-on-man competing in head-to-head, in match play in particular. So I built up that love. I was also kind of a fast walker as a kid. Just walking in and out of school, occasionally people would jog along beside me, and I had that nagging suspicion that I had endurance. But that's all it really was—a nagging suspicion, because there was no actual evidence. Then, when I got to college, I as a form of internal protest, you had to pick one club and one society. And for the club, it would normally be a sports club, but I made sure my menu went to the chess clubs just to be awkward about it and not pick a physical sport. That's how bad it was. But I had a lot of friends who were into the outdoors. And one of them became captain of the mountaineering club in college. And one of my best friends in college basically forced me onto the mountains one day. They gave me no choice. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It was up in Glendalough near Wicklow. And it was one of those days where you get all four seasons, including snow. And luckily, my mates who dragged me out in good gear, they were able to give me. So I was wandering around quite happily in the good gear and the snow and the ice and the cold winds, enjoying everything. And it was just a great day out. And the contrast between being out there in the wilderness and my normal environment, where I was doing a master's in IT at the time, so computer science, so a complete and utter contrast, and I really loved that contrast. So that got me into the outdoors. And but in a year or two, I'd started taking up golf. I'd moved away from college and my first job, and I realized that I couldn't do both golf and hill walking because they both were full day activities. And I logically assessed that the golf is a game of counting mistakes, so you can never have a perfect day, whereas hill walking you could have a perfect day. So I decided, okay, hill walking wins, and
That's good logic.
I
like
dropped the golf. Yeah. So threw myself more hill walking, and as I say to people, I fell out with a bad crowd. I got into my old friends, some of them were doing mountain marathons and things like that, and I made the mistake of saying to one of them that if his partner dropped out, I'd do it with him, and his partner dropped out the following day. So we ended up. That was my first mountain marathon, so falling into it by accident, and we came fourth, just missed out on third because he just made one mistake going to the last control. And we both came in with the attitude of, got to come back next year, fix that, and get on the podium, which we did, and that kind of, that got me into the style of, hill walking for training and building up speed a bit. And a few years later, but at the age of about, I think I was 29, by then the hill walking had also converted to mountaineering. I'd done an alpine training course, and I'd been for a few 2-week trips out to the Alps in the summer, climbed probably about 24,000 meter peaks, including the Matterhorn. Myself and my climbing partner did that as a pair, no guides, which was great fun. Probably my most enjoyable climbing climb, as I describe it, plus a few spins around the likes of Mont Blanc and so on. So I was gaining lots of mountain knowledge and lots of mountain experience, and you can see this is all very useful from a trail ultra run point of view, because I was very happy to get out in those environments, and relatively safe to do so because I was building up a big knowledge base of what's out there and how to deal with it all and what gear works and so on and so forth. So at age 29 or so, my bad crowd who were dragging me to all these things, a few of them were doing the Dublin Marathon. So as usual, I said, okay, if you're training for it, I'll train along with you, and I might give it a go. So I can well remember that the day I knew I could run was the last long training run we did before the marathon, 2 weeks before. We did a 20 miler in the Phoenix Park in Dublin, which is a fantastic place to run. And coming to the end, we were all running together, 4 of us running together, and I was feeling great. And I decided, with about a mile or 2 miles to go, there's a long straight finish, and I decided I'm going to sprint for the car because I feel like I can. So I just took off and started running without saying a word. And the most sensible of them just ignored me. 2 others started chasing after me. One gave up after about 100 meters, and the most determined gave up after about 400 or 500 meters. But I just kept going. I ran all the way to the car, and I knew then that I could run, that I was outrunning these people who I used to look up to as being fit. And so I adjusted my targets for the Dublin Marathon, and I decided to aimed for sub 3 and ran 2:57. So
Oh, wow.
that was the confirmation that I could run. So first marathon was 2:57, which was a kind of a problem because, the obvious target in marathons is sub 3. And when you do it on your first, it's kind of, okay, the next targets are slightly more awkward to say the least. What are you going to aim for? 250 is a bit of a non-number. 230 is a good number, but geez, it's a long way from 3 to 230.
Yeah,
and for records,
you're heading for
that.
like Olympic selection end of things. There,
That's the kind of direct that, and certainly that level of training would be required and talent. But the same crowd then also the following year took me to my first hill run. And obviously, I loved that from the off. And they're short races, but I loved them. And again, loved the competition. Turned out I wasn't a great climber, but I was a fast descender in those days. So I find myself getting the high point in fifth or sixth, look ahead at the field and start, putting the targets on everyone I could see and usually catch everyone I could see. If I could see them, I'd catch them. So that was a fun way to race, and I really got into the high running. And then I think within 2 years of that first marathon, I tried my first ultra, which is a 50k race in the Dublin Mountains. And it was the only ultra in Ireland at the time. It's now called the Morris Mullins Ultra, named after the founder. And the first one, it ended up being a 4-way battle for the win, and I was one of the 4. So it was a very enjoyable race again. Similar to my first mountain marathon, I was 4th, the 4-way battle. So the same result. I came back the following year determined to get on the podium. I think I got second the following year and so on, and eventually kept at that one until I broke the record for the race, which was one of my great runs of all time.
Brilliant!
It just, some days you have a perfect day. The day I broke the record for that race was the perfect day. It remains unbroken because they changed the route. So my old record is set in stone.
That one's for life. Perfect.
Exactly. And it just evolved from there. I pushed out from there, trying new things, including the flat stuff. On the base of that 50k, I got picked for an Irish team for the Anglo-Celtic Plate 100k. And that was another big step in my evolution because it was up in Harriet Watt in Edinburgh, and it was about 2-3k lap. And I remember being disgusted with myself because whatever the lap times were, I remember for the first 50k I was doing 16 minutes, and the second I was doing 18, and I was horrified at myself for having dropped that 2-minute average. But then they posted it, this in pre-internet days, they posted up all the on paper, all the lap intervals of every runner on the sports hall where the prize giving was around. So I went and actually looked at everyone's intervals and realized that I had the smallest gap between slowest and fastest lap time. And I realized at that point that even though this was an international competition, I was actually the most consistent runner and had some kind of pacing ability, which, it was all plugging in. I was learning. And from there on, it was just pushing things out, trying things, first 24-hour race, first multi-day race, first big runs in the mountains, another big part of the evolution. It's trying to break the record for the Wicklow Way, which is about, I think it's about 150 or 130, 150k, but it's Ireland's best known long distance walking trail. And at the time, very few people even thought about running it. I knew of 2 or 3 people who did it, and I went and I broke the record for that. And that felt like an expedition, about 130k. And finished and saying, oh, thank God, I'll never have to do that again. I broke the record by 4 hours, but I ran it 3 more times, of course. So now it seems nice, short, easy training run.
Yeah, that's a training run now, surely.
Exactly. But yeah, that's the evolution, just building and building. And I was looking for that inflection point where I think most people have a level of talent and there's an optimal distance. It's obvious if you're an Olympic champion at 1500 meters, then your optimal distance is 1500 meters. You'll be less good at 800, you'll be less good at 3000. And I think there's a bell curve there. So I'm trying to find where my bell curve is. And I've not found it because every time I go further, I seem to get better up to, I'm probably at my most competitive at multi-day, like 6-day type races. So
wow,
it's still rising. I haven't found the inflection point. I might have to try something like the Sri Shinwai 3,100 mile race.
Oh, I remember talking to a runner who'd done that 7 times. I
Oh
went to
yeah,
a 24-hour track. Abershall Sherrington, that was it. And
yeah,
I
yeah.
couldn't. That's incredible. Was it
It
52
is.
day time limit?
It's something like that. Yeah, it's an incredible race, but yeah, for someone who works in the real world, it's gonna be a hard
Yeah,
one to take on board.
that's just a 6 weeks you've got to dedicate to plodding around the same city block over and over again, isn't it?
Yeah,
I just don't think mentally that I could take on something like that.
that is a challenge. It's much more. It's definitely more of a mental than a physical challenge, in my estimation. Not having done it, but that's what it looks like to me. Having done a 6 day race, it's definitely the mental side. It's harder, and I think as you go into multi days, the mental side does become bigger and bigger and bigger, without doubt.
Well, you mentioned sort of 24-hour, 6-day events as well. They tend to be they tend to be on the flat, don't they? They tend to be very track
Yeah, flat
based.
loops. Yeah, yeah. Some of them are track. Yeah, I've done quite a few track based 24 hours, which is actually an interesting one. Is I'd never run around a 400-meter track in a full 400 meters until my first lap of my first 24-hour race in Tooting Beck, and then I did about 500 of them.
Wow. Yeah. I I find that much more difficult to imagine. I think the idea of spending 24 hours in the hills comes with something different around every corner. You know, something different every time you go over a lump.
Yeah.
How does 5 days on the spine compare with 5 days on a 400-meter track? What do you get as much out of a 6-day flat race as you would out of a multi-day in the hills?
It's definitely different, and you're getting different things out of them. The multi-days in the hills are definitely easier, I think, which is the unusual answer. And they're easier because they take more. You have to have a larger skill set. You have to, and that skill set gets brought into operation, and it's distracting. There's so many things you have to stay on top of that keeps you mentally busy. So, for the likes of the spine, as an obvious example, you have to do your own navigation. You have to basically do your own nutrition, everything else, gear, etc. Deal with the weather, deal with that, and that's constant. If you stop navigating for 5 minutes, that could be a multi-hour mistake as you try and figure out how do I get back to where I need to get back to, etc., etc., etc. Plus, there's so many things that can go catastrophically wrong there that'll end your race, and unrecoverably so, because you might need to be rescued by someone else or whatever. That they're unrecoverable problems. Whereas on a track, you actually have more balance for error, but you have more time to think about what hurts. And the trap is there to focus on what's hurting and what's going wrong, etc., etc. So there's ups and downs. The pluses to the short loops courses is they're very pure in that for a mountain race, they don't compare to anything outside the race itself. You couldn't even compare the spine to the FKT on the Pennine Way, because there's so many differences that you just can't compare the times. Whereas, say a 24-hour race, you're racing. You compare yourself to any other 24-hour race, basically, in the planet, and you're comparing yourself to the existing records. You are following all the legends out there. Same with 6 days, obviously. So your time is valid as a time, if you know what I mean. It's like setting a mile, a sub 4 minute mile. It's there. It doesn't matter what course you set the sub 4 minute mile, unless it's completely downhill, if you know what I mean. But sub 4 is sub 4. Same with 24 hours. You're running in the shoes or the shadow of Giannis Kouros. Same with every distance beyond 24 hour runners, and
True
so
enough.
on. But I like that. I love that. Plus, it's the purity of it is good in some ways, because you're just getting tested for your pure ultra running ability. Forget the navigation, forget the dealing with the weather, mostly forget everything else. This is just raw, pure ultra running. Your training and your ability coming into focus, and your mental focus as well. Obviously, with something like that is massive. So I like that purity about it. But there lies the danger. The purity comes at a much more pure form of suffering to match it.
Yeah, true enough. I mean, I've only attended one 24-hour race. I went along with the intention of recording a podcast over the whole 24 hours, and I was tired.
Yeah.
I still find it hard to imagine 24 hours of putting one foot in front of the other, and it's the mental aspect of it that I find particularly impressive there. It would be so easy to catastrophize when there's nothing to distract you from that little niggle you've got in your left knee.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you think maybe...
I don't think I've ever done a 24-hour race without one point in it saying to myself, what were you thinking? You said the last time you're never going to do one of these again. And here you are yet again. Don't do one of these again. And of course, you forget about it afterwards. And you soon enter the next one. Although, having said that, if you ask me what races I'm most afraid of doing, which race would I fear most? It's actually the 6-day race. It's not.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of funny, just before this, I was reading a list of hardest races on the planet, of which I've done 4 or 5. And the only one which looked actually intimidating to me was that Shibnoi 3,100 mile race, because I've done the Tour de Gaunt. That was a wonderful experience. I've done UTMB. That's a great experience. I've done Barkley. That was a great experience. Didn't finish it, but it was still a magnificent experience.
Yeah.
I don't fear any of those, but I fear the 6-day, because I know the suffering and pain I had to go through in the 6-day was undescribable to someone who hasn't done it. Basically, it's a different level. You do go to some interesting place in your own mind, for sure.
For the benefit of anyone listening to this who isn't aware of that, for a 6-day race, we're talking about a loop, somewhere flat, generally, run continuously for 6 days without the timer stopping.
That's correct, yeah. And you just have to keep going for as long as, and you can stop anytime you like. Usually there's an aid station, you can pick up stuff as you go. Usually there's some shelter of some form, sometimes a nice bed, usually. And it's very easy. Well, that's part of the problem. It's so easy to stop. It's just drawing you. It's usually within half a lap at most. So that's the trap, of course.
Yeah. Wow. Very different from the mountains. I didn't realise that you'd sort of had a bit of a mountaineering background before you got into the racing.
Yeah,
that must have had a positive effect on your sort of future races. The self-reliance, I guess.
Yes, massively so.
Yeah.
Plus the confidence of knowing that I've been on, the ground we cover in running races tends to be a lot easier than the ground we cover mountaineering. And you see it when you look at the videos of, the real mountain goals, so like a Killian, and you look at what he's doing, and it's a step above what we do in most races, like even the UTMB, which is, would be rated a relatively hard, difficult race, is trivial in comparison to going up the actual mountains that you're running around. So, it all seems much more straightforward in progress. So you have that confidence of knowing you can deal with what the mountains can throw at you, hopefully. Don't want to jinx myself too much here. But yeah, it's good having that. Plus, it's a great endurance foundation, going out and into the hills for 8 or 9 hours at a time, whether that's hill walking or actual mountaineering, either way, it's still a great endurance building. So when I did my first ultra run, I actually had a massive endurance base behind me. Even when I did that first marathon, I had a massive endurance base, having been hill walking around the mountains of Ireland and the Alps and so on for the previous 6 or 7 years. Was definitely beneficial, no doubt about it. It feeds in.
Yeah, I bet. You talk about being unintimidated by some of the races you look at. That's got to come from some of the intimidating looking territory that you explored sort of early in your outdoor pursuits.
Absolutely, and plus the fact that one of the oddball things involved was I'm actually kind of afraid of heights quite a bit. So I had to teach myself how not to be afraid of heights while standing on, originally Alps with 1,000-meter drops on either side and things like that, and how to focus that out and deal with it. So yeah, it teaches you an awful lot, that's for sure. And handling fear, real fear, because that I was dealing with my own real fears and those things which tend not to happen in the running races much. Wow. Occasionally they do, but that's usually because you made a bit of a navigational booty somewhere.
Well, thanks very much for that. I guess we're starting to come towards the spine here. I'm just thinking about the last time we spoke to each other. As we said before, it would have been just before everything went crazy with the pandemic. So that would have been you just off the back of coming second on the winter spine.
Yeah.
And just a little before that, your UTMB in Oman.
Yeah.
Which was an overall race win, wasn't it?
An overall race win, yeah.
From what I've seen about that, that was a fairly mountainous course. Would that be fair to say?
It was. It's one of the most technical.
I thought the UTMB looked lumpy, but
yeah, that was good and lumpy. And it wasn't just the big lumps; it's the little lumps. It was a very technical terrain. I mean, there was one section of the course on paper on the profile that just looks like a nice long descent. And you think, oh, good, I'll fly down this and get to the next climb. And that was probably the most vicious section of the entire course because it was baby's head rocks, the whole way. And it was one step wrong and you could break an ankle kind of thing. And about 1,000 meters of that going down, which took all my concentration the whole way in dark with the head torch to illuminate and having to look out for just the painted rocks every now and again to make sure I was staying on track because it was just boulder fields everywhere. And yeah, it was really technical and I loved that. Absolutely loved it, I have to say, because you really felt like you were out there. And yeah, plenty of good up and downs. There was some good hand climbing as well as in parts where you wanted your 4 points of contact just to be sure and obviously you had the potential issues with heat as well, which luckily, oddly enough, I'm very good at dealing with because I ended up my main rival in that race was actually a local boy who was in the army and was able to train on the course and so on. So I was racing to someone who was well adapted, but I actually outraced him even for heat adaptation, I think. So which is quite odd for an Irish person, but there you go.
I didn't want to bring the nationality into it, but you can group us in with anyone in the British Isles for people who are used to variable weather. Yeah. And having seen you do so well on the winter spine, I'd have said at that time, well, Eoin Keith, he thrives in bad weather. He'd be good in the cold. You're saying that actually you'd prefer to be out there in the heat.
Yeah, I think relatively speaking, I thrive better in the heat. And the reason is you throw gear at it and you throw your knowledge at it. And once you have the right gear and the right knowledge, you can deal with cold. Whereas with heat, you subtract gear, but only to a point where there's no gear left to subtract. And after that, you're stuck. Yeah. You do have some amount of knowledge, but the gear is not really going to help you too much. You still have to deal with the heat, but I still had good heat gear because my Columbia, my sponsors actually, as well as making good rain gear, they make some fantastic heat gear, including some great sun reflector stuff, which worked really well. But having said that, if you're running in the mountains, 30 degrees centigrade, it's going to feel brutally hot at times, and of course it does, particularly climbing up in direct sunshine, reflecting all around off the hot rocks. So you just have to be able to deal with it. And for some odd reason, I'm very good at dealing with heat. I'm actually not good at dealing with cold in terms of I don't like being cold and I don't like being wet. And so my trick there is actually don't be cold and don't be wet, but getting the good gear on early and making sure I don't get too cold and I don't get too wet. So I do all the tricks I can. Even in the summer spine, I was probably carrying more gear than most other people because for certainly at the end of the race, I would have had not only the mandatory gear, which was a spare base layer, but I had a spare down jacket just because, even in the summer, I was not going to get cold. If it got cold at night, I was covered. If I had to take a 30-minute nap, I could put on the down jacket and be comfortable. So it was worth it. For me, it's worth carrying that little bit of extra weight to make sure that I don't get into the discomfort of getting cold. Likewise, at wet, I was never going to do anything except carry a proper full-on rain jacket, and they tend to come with me in every single race. Even in Oman, I think I had a proper rain jacket because if it did rain, I was going to get through it, with the right gear. So that's the oddballness of it. Despite being very good at dealing with the arduous conditions, it actually is dealing with it as opposed to handling it, if you know what I mean. As in, it's knowledge and gear.
Yeah, Maybe something else that comes from the time you spent out in the mountains as well. The being prepared for whatever could come.
Absolutely.
And you were on the money. I mean, you'd crossed the finish line obviously pretty quickly at this year's Summer Spine, but not long after you came in, the weather turned bad and stayed bad. And we had some really, really wintry weather up in the Cheviots for the last couple of days of the race.
Yeah, and it's not unsurprising, because it's mountains can join their own weather, so you have to be prepared. Every time I go into the mountains on a training run, I carry a big loaded rucksack which is full of winter gear. Even forecast for a heat wave this weekend, I will still have my winter gear in my rucksack running around in the 25, 26 degree heat, because A, you never know, and B, it's good training. Because if you're going to be carrying it in a race, you might as well carry it training and be used to carrying it around. But it's good to be prepared, because you never know what's going to happen. And again, as we were saying earlier, not having that gear can cause you to have a race ending problem. Whereas it's just, in terms of the risk reward, the risk is much higher. Versus the downside of carrying a small bit of extra weight, and the extra weight can be really small for some things like shelters. So, a little solid bag is really very light, but could potentially save your life. So if you actually worked out the risk versus the downsides, you carry it all the time. Same. Rain jacket, absolutely. Rain jacket will get you out of 80 or 90% of the problems. You'll be much better off having a rain jacket on, because once you stop, you're going to get colder. No matter where in the mountains you are, and even without hitting the worst of the bad weather in the summer spine, even at that going across fell, I was still getting out extra gear. I did actually take out my gloves and put them in my front pocket on my rain jacket, which I already had on to protect me from the winds which were picking up as we went across the Great Dunfell Crossfell. Because again, erring on the side of being comfortable and warm rather than dropping down into the cold territory. And just use it. Gear's there. Use it.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Also very comforting for the race directors that are watching over you. It's good to know you've got the right kit in that bag there.
Absolutely.
Hi everyone, sorry to interrupt. Just here to remind you that this episode was brought to you by Resilient Nutrition, and you can find their full range of elite long-range fuels exclusively on the BTU store now. The elite long-range fuels are a series of delicious nut butter products with micronutrients and supplements designed to give you exactly what you need when you need it. They're delicious, they're great for fueling your whatever your adventure is, and you can find them on the BTU store and nowhere else right now. Store.beyondtheultimate.co.uk. That's store.beyondtheultimate.co.uk. Okay, let's get back to the podcast. It must have come with its own sort of special frustrations then, where off the back of this brilliant win in Oman, and then you were second place just with only John Kelly ahead of you in the spine, and then slam. That's it. No more racing. Goodbye. How did the pandemic affect you then, as a runner?
As a runner, in terms of my life, it probably affected me a lot less than most people, because work-wise, I was very easily able to adjust. I work in the IT department of a medical university, so we were ahead of the curve on multiple fronts in terms of dealing with this, because we had foresight what was going to happen in the medical university. Most of the experts in Ireland were professors on our staff somewhere, so we were well warned about what was coming. Working from home, I have all the right gear, and I actually became busier at work over the pandemic, because we were very much became a heart of the operations of keeping the system going, which obviously is producing doctors is a pretty important part of dealing with a pandemic. And
just a bit.
Still turning out 100 or 200 doctors a year. So that was all very good and very rewarding. And then of course, running, I used to commute in and out to work by cycling. So the adjustment I made was I now commute in and out in my shed on my turbo trainer. So I made sure to keep the routine and keep the pattern and keep the training benefits by just keeping that. I'm actually, because as a turbo trainer, it's actually harder work than dealing with the roads and the traffic, because it's more consistent. So I was actually getting fitter. And by the middle of summer, I was probably at my fittest I had been in a long time. I'd certainly had dropped my weight down to my early 20s weight, which was quite an improvement. So training wise, the pandemic went very well. It was very frustrating having all the races just getting cancelled and cancelled. But yeah, you just have to look at it and say, next one. And that's what I was doing, next race. And then as they got cancelled out next year and so on. But I did actually manage to get 2 races in 2020, which was something. And there were about 3, counting the winter spine, which happened before the madness. And I also got in my first attempt at a backyard ultra before the madness hit. Although we got a different madness in that we in the spine we had Storm Brendan, and I can't remember, but I think we were up to D in the storm names by the time we got to the backyard. But I got the D storm in the backyard. So 2 races, 2 named storms.
Pandemic on and named storms following you around race to race.
Exactly.
Great year.
Yeah, great year. I had a second go at the backyard in October, just as restrictions were easing a bit. And the international version of Bigs came on, and I was on the Irish team for international, and came second in that one. Was first loser, because we're all losers.
Yeah, that's the joy of the backyard ultra. You didn't come second. Nobody did.
No, nobody did, exactly. The assist, they call it, when the kind out of kindness. So I was the assist on both of those, as it happens.
With form as a sort of 24-hour and 6-day runner, I can see how that format might work well for you. You're also no stranger to sleep deprivation.
Exactly. Although sleep deprivation is my least loved aspect of ultra running, so that folded in unnicely with the backyard format, and this is sleep deprivation that's taking me out, and that's why I'm not winning them. That's why I'm only doing assists, and I need to do better as well. I would put on my own report card there and figure out how to get that whole sleep management thing going on those. But it's very interesting. It's one of the most interesting formats, and Laz being an evil genius of a race organizer, I think that's its ultimate evil genius, is the backyard format. It's just brilliant in so many ways.
Not too long after I did interview you in 2020, I got the chance to talk to Laz, and obviously I went in to talk to him about the Barclay. I want to hear about the Barclay and the history of that. But you really got from talking to him that he's really proud of the backyard and how that's taken off. And it's such a simple concept, but it's very compelling.
Simple, but not so simple that anyone else thought of it beforehand.
Yeah.
But even the simplicity of the challenge is beautiful, in that you're going into a race with no idea what you have to do. No idea, because it's totally dependent on your competitors. It's such a big black hole of an unknown every time you go at it. It's brilliant. It's evil genius, absolutely. Plus, having done my first multi-day race was a 3-day race, and I did 300 miles in 3 days, which if you do the backyard, you need to do 300 miles in 3 days exactly. And I knew exactly how hard it was, because the race I did that first one was across the years in Phoenix, Arizona. And only 4 people had ever done 300 miles in across the years 3-day race. And those 4 are Yanis Kouros, who is the greatest ultra runner of all time, John Geezer, one of the greatest American 24-hour runners and most runners of all time, 6-time American 24-hour record holder, for example. Wow. Third guy was Joe Fages. He did the year I did it. He's the greatest American 6-day runner of all time at this point. He's the American record holder. And the fourth guy was me, who's the only person to do it without winning the damn thing, because I was going to be to Joe on it. So only 4 people ever in the history of that race. So to do that in a backyard format, I knew it's something else. So when I see these 3 runners who've now done it, the two from Suffolk plus Sam, the dentist from Belgium, Carol Sade. And they've done 300 miles plus, but they hit that 300 miles in 3 days. And that's a hard thing to do when you've complete control of the race, with mind where you have to stop and you only can take a break in these tiny little intervals that you have to create for yourself. It's remarkable. It's an amazing format. Amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. Still, I'm going to draw us back into the spine again. I'm going to do it. It's
no problem.
You seem to have come out of the pandemic then in pretty good shape. It's been a year of training for you, effectively.
Effectively, yeah.
So, what were your intentions when you came into the spine? Like, this was your first time doing it in the summer, and you can imagine what we were like, Ian. Behind the scenes, we were obviously like, Ian's coming, isn't he? Ian's going to come. We were really excited to see what you were going to do. Firstly, you must just have to sort of ignore all that, anybody else's expectations.
I'm aware of it, but I do ignore it completely. I focus on my own internal sort of level. I'm completely happy to ignore any expectations that anyone else puts on me and just, work with my own boundaries. I've had people say that to me when they see me, returning up to the 24-hour World Championships and, 300 best 24-hour runners in the world standing there, and I'm usually on the start line, completely relaxed, absolutely, just taking it all in and enjoying it. And I'm pretty good at just managing out that stuff and just focusing in on what I want to get out of it and what I want to enjoy. So for the spine, I suppose my targets were really was genuinely to enjoy myself, because this was an opportunity to just actually enjoy the route. And I as you got from earlier, I actually loved the sunshine, so I was kind of hoping we get a heat wave. A, because I like the heat, and B, because clearly I'm competitively kind of better at it. It would be more likely to burn off my competitors than it was to burn me off, so it'll probably work out well there. So I was hoping for that, but I could deal with anything. Having done the winter, I knew no matter how bad it was never going to be as bad as the winter, because if nothing else, we'd have light, and light.
No mention of snowshoes.
No mention of snowshoes, and I didn't have them with me. I was just that was the prime rule was get out and enjoy and just have fun, and don't let any other pressure do anything to stop me enjoying the experience. But the other thing I wanted to do is, having seen, there weren't too many to cross compare, but the times between people's summer versus winter times were quite big. So I set myself a minimum standard of beating my very best winter time, which is 96 hours, which I think is still the third best time, which isn't bad considering the first and second are, especially Jasmine and John Kelly. I wanted to beat that, and that was really my only time. And I did run through the field in terms of people who were in my own cohort, hoping people were being honest with the cohorts, just to have a quick look to see was there anyone there, what the backgrounds were, and who was likely to be competitive. I knew then that I should be, at the very least, racing for the win. So that was obviously a target to go out and win the thing. So and if someone was able to race me, all the better, because it would be good to have a race, which actually did turn out that way, as it happens, but not from anyone I looked at, because I didn't look at the women's fields. I was only looking at the men, which yet again turned out to be a mistake.
Oh, yeah, we've been bitten that way before.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I
knew what was coming with Jasmine. She was always a hero of mine, so yeah.
No, incredible. But it was great to see that. It was a fantastic bit of running from Anna Troop, who
it was magnificent, absolutely phenomenal. And I think for those of us who are out there with her and know it looks even better, if you know what I mean. It looks great on paper, but with the knowledge, it's actually even better. And whose record she broke? She broke one of the great British ultra runners' records. It's outstanding.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. So, at what time? Because again, what we were like behind the scenes. From within probably about the first half day of the spine starting, somebody had tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, they're on record pace, And you're like, hang on, okay? They're like 50 miles deep. It's barely started. Let's calm down. But it was being talked about that early on. Yeah. So at what point did you start thinking, hang on, maybe I'm on for something here?
I was being told about it by Kevin, especially Kevin McCann. And
shout out to Kevin McCann.
big time, because he is a fantastic member of the AIDS the race staff.
He
So
is that.
Kevin was filling me in, and I was paying attention 100% to what he was saying, because he's someone who's always worth paying attention to what he's saying to anyway. But I wasn't thinking that I was going to do it, because 77 hours just seems so much faster than, or 78 hours seems so much faster than 96. It's a massive gap. And I just was not, thinking that I was going to, because I was enjoying myself, I was thinking I'm enjoying this too much to actually be suffering enough to be setting the record. But sometimes, quite often, in fact, that's when you do actually go out and set records. That's when you're running so well that you actually manage to factor out all the pains and you are enjoying it, and you are well trained, and that's why you're enjoying it. And this seems to be what was happening there. So I didn't really come down to actually chasing the record until I suppose with Kevin, the most intense discussion we had about it was right in Bellingham at the last major aid station,
Yeah.
where we broke it down into two halves for the last leg and what needed to be done and how far behind I was. And I knew then it was possible, but I was behind track. But by the time I hit Burness, that had switched around, that I was on track, and it was definitely into the possible. It was the you gotta try this, and that became absolutely the focus from that point on. That really was it. I wasn't focused on it at all until that point, although I had been running some mental calculations, I have to say, but that's just distraction. One of the first conversations I had with Kevin was in aid station 3, where I took my first sleep. And while I was going to sleep, I was processing the time intervals into real world time. So I'd worked out that 10 o'clock in the evening on Tuesday was when I needed to get there to break the record. And Kevin told me that on my aid station, the following aid station. So I know I went to sleep talking, thinking through that. That's how I got myself to sleep.
Well, sorry
So
about
yeah.
that.
So it was actually quite late, but once I had that focus, that drove me forwards in a big way.
Yeah.
Particularly the last 4 or 5 hours, I was 100% focused, saying to myself, keep
So
run
again, for
everything.
the guys at home that don't know the races intimately, Bellingham's the last checkpoint, so we're pretty far up the course at this point.
Yeah.
And I remember you leaving there, and I remember us bumping into you again at Burness. And as you sort of struck out from Burness, all of us looked at each other and went, "Oh, he's going to do this." We felt like we're not going to say it to him. We're not going to say it like everybody touch wood, but he's going to get this. And yeah, you did.
It was touch and go, but and I did have to work very hard for it.
No doubt.
The target needed to be there, and I have to credit, all credit to the record being there. If it wasn't up there as a target, I wouldn't have been as fast as I was. There's at least half an hour minimum to break the record, and there's probably another half hour of just the sheer effort of being on that full power. Whereas I really enjoyed the Cheviets and being out there, and I might have relaxed a lot more if I didn't know there was a record to be chased. Although having said that, I knew that Anna was still not far behind, so I couldn't relax so much as just amble around and take it all in, because there was the target in front, but also the threat behind. if you overdid the relaxing.
Yeah, and she'd never faded away as a threat, did she? She was just
No, never did.
Always.
Never did.
I mean, in spine terms, always back there over your shoulder. In
Absolutely.
reality, over your shoulder is about 2 hours behind down the course, but that's
well,
nothing in spine
interestingly
terms.
enough, some of it somehow I picked it up wrong, because I think it was confusion in the first and second. It's in the second aid station, where whatever the communications are, I got it wrong in my head, because there was the first other male chasing me was from the second cohort, so he had a 2 hour advantage over me. So if he was within 2 hours of me on the course, he was ahead of me in reality, which is a big advantage to chaser, because if they can see you, they're in front, which is massive advantage mentally. So I knew he was, but I actually misheard or something that Anna was also from the second cohort. So I thought she was in race terms right on top of me. That she was, rather than 2 or 3 hours behind, she was within an hour of me, or possibly slightly in front. And it was only at Bellingham, the last aid station, that I actually found out the truth that she had started in the same cohort, and I kind of went, oh, there you go, that's not so bad. But at that point, the pressure from the chasing was even more intense than it appeared on paper, because in my own head, it was actually worse.
God, yeah. I mean, if we're talking about 2 hours of cushion behind you being just over your shoulder on the spine, for you, she was breathing down your neck. You thought she was right behind you.
Yeah, I was literally wishing that she was in the same cohort so I could have that head-to-head race. So I'd be more comfortable with that, because as I say, it's more difficult dealing with the virtual version, because you really have to be on top of them and stay well ahead,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I enjoyed that racing. Having said that, it's part of the fun.
The big question that I've got written down here, and it seems really obvious. How did it compare to the winter race then? I mean, there are obvious differences, but did you get more or less out of it? Was it more or less of a challenge? You have a unique position now as someone who's been the overall winner of both.
Well, semi-unique, because Sab has won.
Of course, yeah.
But I actually figured out what I have the unique. I'm the only person to hold the record for both. So there is that.
Yeah, true enough.
So the summer was more fun, more pure fun, and I enjoyed the experience more. But the winter is a bigger challenge, and it's a bigger achievement. So it's 50-50. You can balance those out in your own head, whichever way you want. And the winter is in my mind, more prestigious. Winning the winter race, definitely, just because there's so much more you have to deal with in the winter. It's you have to get a lot more things right, and you have to be on top of your game a lot more. You have much more margin of error in the summer, but the summer is definitely more enjoyable because you're seeing so much more. The weather is better, the ground you're running on is better. You can hit higher speeds more easily, which means you're getting through things more easily, which again is mentally easier. Somehow I felt a lot better in across the board. Even in terms of sleep deprivation, it was my best spine by a huge margin in terms of how I was feeling about sleep deprivation. Because you can have quite a few hours of discomfort in the winter race. Whereas I really didn't have much of it in the summer race, and it was just overall a much more pure fun experience. So I'm not going to go definitively either way. They both are the big ups and downs, but it's going to be hard to do the winter after doing the summer. But I am going to do it.
Yeah, I bet. I know we talked before the race about this being a nice opportunity to actually see some more of the course that you'd never had a chance to really see before. Were there any parts of the course that were a big surprise going through them with that much daylight? Or anywhere that you've disliked in winter that you got to enjoy this time around?
Certainly there were a few parts I enjoyed a lot more. The Cheviets were fantastic in the summer, absolutely. But I enjoyed them a lot in the winter, having said that. But summer was the step up. That's my favorite part of the course by a long shot. There were definitely parts of the course which went from absolutely brutal misery to being fine, if you know what I mean. Not necessarily spectacular, but not a point of deep suffering. Coming out of Duffton being one of the best examples. There's the trail as it leaves Duffton is really quite sticky and nasty in winter and muddy, and absolutely hate it. Whereas in the summer, you just totted up it. It was fine. And it goes to a farmyard, which in the winter, you're literally ankle deep in crap from the farmyard animals.
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating, and it's terrible. Whereas in summer, it's fine. It's fine. You just run straight through. So those are definitely massive improvements. But nothing. Winter has its own form of beauty. So there's a lot of winter in some ways is more interesting than in the summer. Like certainly, say along the likes of Cauldron Snout in that area, I really loved it in the summer. I went through it faster and enjoyed all that. But winter, it's more spectacular in some ways because the water is running harder and heavier, and the ground is much more technical to deal with. So again, it's 50-50 which way you want to interpret it. I'll always go in and try and take the pluses, whichever it is. In view terms, because the first time I did the spine, we actually got interrupted a lot because of the winds, and we had a couple of holes. I'd actually seen far more of the course in daylight than I realized, but I was seeing parts I hadn't seen in a long number of years. Like certainly out of Bellingham and towards Burness, I really enjoyed seeing that in the daylight again. But it did bring back a memory that I had actually seen this once before. But there are still sections of the course I've yet to see in daylight, including some of my other most disliked parts, which would be the leg certainly from Slaggy Ford onwards towards the between Slaggy Ford and the Hadrian's Wall. Yeah, it's still rubbish. I still haven't seen it in daylight. Still possibly thinking it might be all right in daylight, but no, still don't like it.
Yeah, people do swear about that section of the course.
Yeah. It's kind of nondescript. Is one way of describing it. And if it's not nondescript, it's nasty.
Wow, a ringing endorsement for that area of the world. There's the
Eoin
Keith TripAdvisor review.
Yeah, it seems to be fairly universal. Yeah, the other bit I don't like much is just coming out of town, hailing and heading off down that way. Although it is interesting, but yeah, it's sloppy. Even in summer, it mightn't be as muddy, but you still have to pay a lot of attention to the navigation to try and stay on course. And yeah, there's very little trace of a trail, so that's good and bad.
Well, I guess last couple of questions then. I want to try and tap into a little bit of the knowledge you've accumulated over the amount of times you've done the spine race now. You've mentioned nav a couple of times. What kind of naver are you? Because I've seen a bit of a spectrum across the spine race now of some people who are sort of all gadgets and are reading it off a display at all times, and other people for whom the gadgets are a fallback and are there with a map and compass doing it in a sort of classical way, I suppose. Yeah. Where do you fall on that? Are you more at the gadget end of things as an IT person?
Well, going back into my background, I have that navigation background from doing the mountain marathons and so on, and being in the mountains before we had the gadgets. So I used to do a lot of adventure racing as well, and I was usually, I think every adventure race that I've done, I was a navigator on the team, including at World Championships and with international teams. So I have a very, very solid classical navigation background, and I'm pretty damn good at it, if I say so myself.
Well, that much is evident, yeah.
Well, you wouldn't know sometimes. But so I could do the classic bit, but I'm happy to let the gadgets, if I can go faster by using the gadgets, I'll use the gadgets, especially if they're mandatory gear, which is the case in the winter spine where you have to have it, then why not use it? But what I actually use these days is my head. I have an amazing memory for location, and
useful.
If I've been somewhere before, I will normally remember it. So I think this year I probably did well over 95% of the spine on pure memory without reference to anything outside my own head. Just here and there, I would have the GPS ready for reference, but that would be about it.
Wow.
I'm able to orient myself pretty well. I'm able to remember location pretty well. I know when to grab the gadget for a cross check, and quite often that's all it is, just a cross check to confirm that what I think is right. And again, 99% of the time they'll be on target, but the cross checks are still worth doing because the consequences of getting it wrong are much higher than taking a second out to do a cross check. I still managed to make one map mistake this year. which was in the area of what would have been the turnoff for the first aid station in the winter race, which we ran straight through this year. So I wasn't used to doing the straight through.
You're not the only person who went straight past that on muscle memory.
Yeah,
We were watching that happen on the tracker.
yeah, but I figured it out within, I think I only lost about 5 or 10 minutes. So at least I figured it out correctly and I knew to get out the gadgets to check it and correct it as quickly as possible and just get back on track, which again, quite often making mistakes is part of the game. It's dealing with the mistakes is what separates the winners from the losers. And probably the greatest lesson I've learned from sport, which applies perfectly to life, is that you are where you are. It doesn't matter how you got there. It doesn't matter what mistakes you made to get there. You need to get you have a target to be somewhere. You just need to work out how to get from where you are to where you want to be, irrespective of what mistakes brought you there. That's a perfect navigational lesson. It's also a perfect life lesson. Forget what mistakes took you here. Just go forward in the direction you want to go forward and figure out what's the best way to do that.
That's perfect, Ian. That also gives me the little soundbite I can use to advertise this podcast. That was absolutely cracking stuff. What about future plans then? Ian, what have you got your eyes set on? And I know it's still difficult to say at the moment because travel restrictions are still there and not all races are able to get up a little.
Yeah. It's actually finding the things that are doable is the tricky part. Absolutely. UTMB is next up in terms of the big targets. This year being this year, it's a much bigger target because it's an actual race that's on and still on, and still as ever it's a classic huge race. So I'll be targeting the UTMB for sure, not to win it, obviously. So definitely out of the question, given it's the most competitive ultra race in the world in terms of trail ultras. But I'll be targeting to get a good result, certainly within my age group. Because these days, being age 52, it's getting more and more difficult to compete against the younger folk out there, but if nothing else, the age groups give you plenty of fun and games to be had, even in a race like the UTMB. So that's the next big one. I'm hoping I might get to Big's backyard in the Mother Lode in Tennessee, in Laz's actual backyard, and that would be an amazing experience. I don't think I would count myself doing extraordinarily well if I managed to be the best Irishman at that, never mind the international competition, because standards are shooting through the roof in the Big's format at the moment. But just to be there and see, because the range of people who are entered this year is phenomenal. So I'd love if I can make it there, but that depends on travel restrictions, obviously, because at the moment that's closed. So for next year, I've still got 1 or 2 race entries held over. The one I'm probably most looking forward to at this stage is the Northern Traverse, which makes a nice cross shape with spine across England, because you run across rather than up and down.
Yeah, of course.
It's a beautiful race. Really love it as a route, and quite looking forward to hopefully getting back to that again. Plus, need to get back to usual 24-hour type runs and things like that. So hopefully the calendar will start filling up, but it's all wait and see as usual. But I have hope.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed we all get to see some more races.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Ian, I have to say, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you for taking the time out of your day.
Chat. Yeah, no, my pleasure. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, look, enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you on a race somewhere else in the near future.
Hopefully, touch wood, it will be nice and soon. Thank you.
Thank you.